There's a strange stillness that comes after 80. Not just around you, though the world does seem quieter when you're not rushing through it, but inside. It's a quiet you can't force and you can't fake. It only comes when you've outlived enough noise. I remember the morning I turned 70. No party, no cake. I woke up alone, boiled an egg, and ate it while the sun was coming through the kitchen window. I thought about calling someone, my daughter maybe, but I didn't. Instead, I just sat there and watched the light spill across the countertop like it was trying to remind me of something I'd forgotten. That was the year things started changing in ways I couldn't ignore. First, it was small, slower steps, a little stiffness in the knees. But the real surprise wasn't in my legs. It was in my calendar. I stopped needing one. Days blurred together. The Monday, Wednesday, Friday rhythm of my working years vanished. And all I had was time. Time and the feeling that maybe I wasn't quite ready for it. I used to walk every morning. Not fast, not for exercise. Just to move. But somewhere along 71 or 72, I noticed I couldn't walk and think at the same time anymore. The rhythm of my legs needed full attention. If I let my mind wander, if I thought too much about bills or my back, or the strange sound the fridge had started making, I'd lose my step, trip on nothing. One morning, I caught my reflection in a shop window and didn't recognize the man. He looked careful, deliberate, a man measuring each step like it might be his last on that sidewalk. And maybe it could have been. That was the first time I realized. The body tells you when time is running short. It doesn't send a memo. It whispers. At 73, my hands began to change. I couldn't open jars like I used to. The grip was still there, but it wasn't reliable. Some mornings it felt like holding a ghost. The strength that once came so naturally had started to slip away without asking. I remember a Sunday afternoon, trying to unscrew a jar of pickles. I laughed at myself when I couldn't do it. Then I got angry, then quiet again. That's the cycle. Laugh, anger, quiet. It's funny how something as small as a stubborn lid can make you feel like you're fading. But the truth is, it wasn't just the pickles. I started dropping things. Cups, notes, a photograph of my late wife once. Slipped right out of my hand like the air had taken it. That moment stayed with me longer than I'd like to admit. Still, I didn't panic. I adjusted. That's what we do, isn't it? We adjust even to decline. You find different jars, different hands. You press your palm instead of twisting with your fingers. You adapt. Quietly. There's something humbling about realizing how much of your strength was invisible until it wasn't there anymore. By 74, balance became an issue. I noticed it one morning while brushing my teeth. I was standing on one leg without thinking, like I always had. Then suddenly I wasn't. My foot slipped just enough to catch me off guard. I didn't fall, but I held the sink a little longer than usual. That sink became a friend after that. I began to notice other little things. Turning around too fast and feeling like the room turned with me. Hesitating at curbs. Avoiding ladders completely. Even bending down to tie my shoes took more thought than it used to. And still, I didn't think of it as a problem. Not until I watched my neighbor, Tom, same age as me, fall one afternoon on the sidewalk. He was just trying to check his mailbox. His left foot gave out and down he went. Nothing dramatic. But when I saw him weeks later with a cane and that quiet sadness in his eyes, I knew it wasn't just about bones. Losing your balance, it's not about falling. It's about trust. When your own body stops feeling reliable, something inside begins to tremble too. You see, the body keeps secrets until it doesn't. And somewhere around 75, sleep became a riddle I couldn't solve. I used to sleep like a stone. Lights out, gone. 8 hours easy. But now, some nights I'd fall asleep before the news was over, only to wake up at 2 a.m. with my mind racing and my body restless. I'd sit by the window, watching the street lamp flicker, listening to the silence of houses that used to hold people I knew. The loneliness didn't come from being alone. It came from knowing how many people I used to say goodnight to, who weren't there anymore. The lack of sleep didn't just make me tired. It made me forgetful. It made me impatient. It made the days longer and the nights heavier. There's a weight to being awake when the world is sleeping, and at that age, the world sleeps earlier than you think. But I learned eventually. I stopped trying to fix it. I accepted that rest might look different now, that maybe what I needed was peace, not unconsciousness. So I made peace with the silence. I made peace with myself. Funny, isn't it? How the things we once saw as inconveniences, walking slower, sleeping less, dropping a cup, become messages, not from some doctor or app, but from life itself, telling us softly, you're moving towards something else now, not an end, a transformation. There was a time, not so long ago, when a hot meal was the highlight of my day. Simple things, a bowl of soup, fresh bread, maybe a peach from the market down the road. I didn't need much, but I looked forward to it. There was a rhythm in preparing food, even just for myself. Boiling water, the sound of a knife on a cutting board. It gave the day some shape. But sometime around 76, I noticed something had shifted. I didn't feel hungry the way I used to. Sometimes, I'd realize it was 3 in the afternoon and all I'd had was coffee and a piece of toast. Not because I was dieting or distracted, I just didn't feel like eating. I told myself it was normal. You don't burn as much energy at this age, I said. You don't need 3 meals. But when I looked in the mirror, the hollowness in my cheeks told a different story. I was losing weight slowly but steadily. Pants got loose. Belts needed new holes. Even my wedding ring began to slip. It wasn't vanity. I didn't care how I looked, but I cared about what it meant. The body was quietly withdrawing, like it was packing up for a journey I hadn't been told about. I remember visiting my friend Arthur. We'd served in the Navy together. He was always a big eater, hearty and full of life. But that day, I found him poking at a sandwich with a blank expression. Just not in the mood, he mumbled. I recognized it right away. That emptiness that wasn't about food at all. Sometimes the appetite fades because the spirit is tired. Not sick, just tired. The kind of tired that doesn't show up in blood tests. It shows up in forgotten dinners and cold teacups left untouched. But I made a choice then. I wasn't going to go quietly. I started treating food like medicine, not just fuel. I made stews again, even if it was just for one. I added spices, colors, memories. And somehow, by honoring the act of eating, I found my way back to the appetite for life itself. That brings me to something I wish I'd understood earlier. The weight of stress doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it creeps in like a draft through an old window. Quiet, invisible, but chilling all the same. At 77, I went through a rough patch. My sister passed. My grandson moved away. And I began waking up with a tightness in my chest that wasn't physical. It was worry, deep, constant, shapeless worry. About the world. About my children. About whether I was still useful to anyone. I didn't talk about it. That's how we were raised, to endure. But inside I was fraying. Little things would set me off. A broken glass. A late phone call. Even the neighbor's dog barking too much. My blood pressure went up. Sleep became even harder. My memory started to slip, not from age but from wear. The mind isn't meant to carry so many invisible bags. One morning, I sat by the window and said aloud to no one, I can't keep living like this. And that was the first time I truly saw the cost of unspoken tension. It wasn't just affecting my days, it was shortening my years. So I started letting go. Slowly, I forgave people who weren't asking for it. I stopped watching the news after 6 p.m. I went outside barefoot. I made peace with the unanswered questions. Because stress at our age is a thief. Not a loud one, clever one. Takes moments, then days, then years. And if you're not careful, it'll take your light before your breath. I still get anxious. I still worry. But now I do it with open hands. I let things pass through instead of clinging to them. And let me tell you, that one shift probably added more to my life than any medication ever could. But none of that, not the food, not the stress, not the sleep, means much if you don't have someone to talk to. I learned that lesson the hard way. After 78, the world began to feel smaller. Friends passed. Family got busy. Phone calls became texts. Texts became silence. I'd go days without speaking out loud to another human being. You begin to doubt your own voice after that long. You forget how to laugh, how to listen, how to interrupt someone kindly. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't feel sad, it just feels numb, like you're watching life through glass, but no one's waving back. And yet, I could have reached out. I could have called someone, joined a group, walked into a church or a library or even the grocery store with something to say. But I didn't, because when you're lonely, shame sneaks in too. Tells you you're bothering people, that they're better off without your slow stories and heavy pauses. One evening, I got a knock at the door. It was my neighbor's granddaughter, 7 years old, holding a plate of cookies she had baked. She didn't say much, just smiled and handed them to me, then ran off. That little act broke the spell. I wept, right there in the doorway, not because of the cookies, but because someone had remembered I was here. From that day forward, I made it my mission to connect again. I started by writing letters, yes, actual letters. I called my cousin in Oregon. I joined a community center knitting group even though I didn't know how to knit. They didn't care. They just wanted company. And what I found was this: the heart forgets how to beat alone, but it remembers quickly when another one is near. If you're still here, reading this, listening, leave me a comment, just a few words. Let me know you're out there, that we've shared this moment. Because sometimes, a single reply can remind someone they're still alive in all the right ways. It's a funny thing, strength. When you're young, it's loud, it shows off. You lift heavy things, run fast, win arguments. But past a certain age, strength goes quiet. It hides in how you get out of bed without groaning, how you carry a basket of laundry without leaning against the wall, how you stand up from a chair without thinking about it. At 79, I started noticing something strange. I had to plan my movements, not because I was in pain, but because I had to think about which leg to lead with, whether there was something nearby to hold on to. That kind of awareness wasn't natural to me. It was the first time I realized strength doesn't vanish all at once. Slips away quietly until you reach for it and it isn't there. One afternoon, I tried to lift a box of books, the same box I'd moved from garage to attic a dozen times before. But this time, I couldn't. Not just couldn't lift it, I couldn't even shift it. My arms trembled. My back whispered a warning. And I sat there on the floor, staring at a box I had once treated like nothing. It wasn't about the weight. It was about the message. The body keeps track of every choice you've made. Every cigarette, every skipped walk, every afternoon spent sitting instead of stretching. And eventually it speaks. But the thing I've learned is that it's never too late to listen back. I began small, very small. I started doing leg raises in bed. 10 seconds of holding my own weight. I bought a little hand gripper and squeezed it during commercials. I picked up milk jugs and walked the hallway like a soldier on patrol. And over time, weeks, not days, I felt a shift. No, I didn't become a young man again, but I felt present in my body in a way I hadn't for years. My arms remembered how to carry. My legs remembered how to trust me. We don't talk enough about that, trusting our own bodies again. After injury, after decline, after years of feeling like things are only getting worse. But trust is a two-way street. When you show up for your body begins to show up for you again. There was one night that really brought it home. The power went out. A storm. I got up to light candles, and as I moved through the dark, no flashlight, no phone light, I felt something I hadn't felt in a while. Confidence. I wasn't afraid of falling. I wasn't reaching for every wall like a blind man. I stood tall even in the dark. And that, my friend, felt like freedom. But I'll tell you something else that matters just as much, if not more, than muscles and balance and movement. And that's the ability to ask for help. We don't like that word, do we? Help. It tastes bitter in the mouths of people who've spent a lifetime giving more than they received. But aging humbles you, not in a way that breaks you, but in a way that softens the sharp edges, makes you human again. There was a day, I was probably 78, when I dropped a bag of groceries in the driveway. Apples rolled everywhere. A young man walking by came over, picked them up, and handed them back. I thanked him. He smiled and said, "My grandfather used to drop things too." I laughed politely, but inside, something stung. Not because he was wrong, but because I'd never seen myself as someone who drops things. That wasn't my role. But here's the twist. The moment I allowed that young man to help me, something else happened. He didn't rush off. He asked if I needed anything else. We talked for a while. He came back the next day, brought his little boy. We sat on the porch and shared stories. And just like that, a small moment of weakness turned into a doorway for connection. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. Decline isn't always the enemy. Sometimes it's the invitation to slow down, to receive, to remember that you're part of something bigger than your own independence. I used to think living longer meant being stronger, faster, sharper. But now I think it means being open, being soft where you used to be hard, being willing to laugh at your limitations, being willing to ask, not for pity, but for presence. That shift, that softening, it's a kind of wisdom no book can teach. And you know, I look back now and realize something else. Every day I spent hiding my limitations, pretending I wasn't struggling. Those were the loneliest days. But every day I admitted, even silently, that I needed a little help. Those were the days when the world showed up for me again. Not because I was helpless, but because I was human. So if you're still with me, and I hope you are, maybe take a moment. Leave me a comment. Just a few words to say you're here, that you're listening. You'd be surprised how much it means, not just to me, but to everyone else who might be reading. Because we're not walking through these years alone. We never were. Somewhere around 79 and a half, though I didn't mark the day, I began forgetting things. It started simply. I'd walk into a room and stand there, staring at the chair or the clock or the shoes I never wore anymore, wondering why I came in. I'd pick up a photo and recognize the face but not the context. I'd put on water for tea and find it still cold an hour later. The mind, you see, isn't immune to time. It weathers too. First, I fought it. Wrote little notes to myself. Made lists. Set reminders on a phone I barely knew how to use. But slowly, I realized this forgetting wasn't just about names or dates. It was about noise leaving the room. It was the brain, my old loyal brain, making space for stillness. And that scared me more than I expected. There's a fear that comes with fading memory. Not just the fear of dementia or getting lost, though those are real. No, it's deeper than that. It's the fear that you're becoming less you, less solid, less sharp, less remembered. I've seen it happen to others. I watched my neighbor Rose, a bright woman who once led town meetings, begin to confuse the mailman with her son. I saw her slowly retreat into herself, and I swore I'd never let that happen to me. But here's the quiet truth. No one lets it happen. Just arrives. Gently, like dusk. And the choice isn't about stopping it, it's about responding to it. So I did something that surprised even me. I stopped fighting the forgetting and started remembering differently. I took out my old notebooks and began writing stories. Not for publication, not for anyone's approval, just for me. I wrote down the day I met my wife, the smell of her hair on a warm day, the sound of my daughter laughing in the backseat when she was 5, the argument I had with my brother in 1962 and how we made peace with a handshake and a sandwich. I let the memories come not in order, but in color. Some days I'd sit with just one. A walk in the rain. A dog I had in the 80s. The first time I truly saw my father cry. What I found in that quiet remembering was that life doesn't vanish just because the edges blur. It just softens. And in that softness, there's still beauty, still truth. We don't need perfect memory to live meaningful lives. We just need presence. And yet, presence requires something we rarely talk about. Letting go. Letting go of being in control. Letting go of being sharp. Letting go of the idea that we are only valuable when we are useful, productive, fast. It's hard. Harder than I ever imagined. I spent so much of my life solving problems, fixing things, providing answers. And now, I spend whole mornings watching the sky change color. Not because I'm lazy, but because I understand now deeply that most things don't need fixing. They need witnessing. There's a humility that comes with watching your world get smaller. I used to travel, drove across the country twice, flew to Canada for a fishing trip once. But now I rarely leave my block. The furthest I go is to the garden center 2 streets over. And even that feels like a grand voyage some days. But I see more now than I ever did when I had places to be. I notice the way my neighbor's flowers bloom in a different order each year. I know the sound of the mail truck's brakes. I've memorized the evening breeze that comes through the east window at 5:12 p.m. in late spring. I used to chase meaning across the map. Now I find it in the way a sparrow lands on the porch railing without fear. Time has a way of stripping away the excess. What's left is essence. And one of the hardest truths I've learned after 70, maybe the most surprising one, is that preparing to die doesn't mean giving up on life. In fact, it's the opposite. It means choosing what stays in your heart. What matters? Who matters? I've begun sorting through things. Not morbidly, lovingly. I've labeled boxes not just with names, but with stories. My grandson will get the old compass, the one I carried in the Navy, and I've tucked a note inside it. My daughter will get the record player, and I've listed the albums that made me weep when I missed her mother too much. It's not about things. It's about memory made visible. And I suppose it's about easing the path for those who come after me, giving them something to hold when I'm no longer here to offer a hand. There is peace in preparation, not the kind of peace that comes from resignation, but from intention. I don't fear death. I used to, but not anymore. What I do fear and still wrestle with is the idea of leaving unfinished words, unspoken kindness, hugs withheld because of pride, letters never sent. So I've started writing again. Short notes to people I haven't spoken to in years. Some will respond, some won't, but that's not the point. The point is, I still have a voice, and it's mine to use gently until the last syllable. If I could whisper anything to you, whoever you are, wherever you are, it would be this: life doesn't shrink because you get old. It becomes more concentrated, like tea steeped longer, like light at sunset. And if you're here now, reading these words, breathing gently, wondering how much time you have left, maybe consider this. Time is not only measured in years. Sometimes a single quiet moment, fully lived, deeply felt, is worth a decade of rushing. There's something I've learned only in these later years, a truth no doctor ever told me, no textbook ever dared to explain, that the way you carry your heart might matter more than the condition of your body. I've seen men live past 90 with crooked spines and failing eyesight, but kindness that kept them young. I've seen others, strong in limb, sharp in mind, grow bitter, closed off, and somehow older than their years. That's something they don't measure in clinics, the posture of the spirit. At this age, people often ask, how do you stay alive this long? But maybe the better question is, how do you stay open? Open to change, open to discomfort, open to being wrong, open to love even after loss. Because the longer you live, the more you lose. Friends disappear like songs on the radio you don't hear anymore. Rooms that were once filled with voices now echo differently. Holidays pass with fewer plates on the table. You learn to fold grief into your morning routines like sugar into your coffee. Present, but no longer overwhelming. And with that loss comes a choice. You can close, or you can remain. A little cracked, a little tender, but still willing. Still willing to be surprised. I've been surprised even now, by laughter I didn't expect, by sunrises I didn't earn, by the way a stranger's kindness can feel like rain after drought. You know, one of the most shocking truths about growing old is how much you're still needed. Not in the ways you used to be, not for fixing cars or lifting boxes or giving advice no one asked for, but in quieter, softer ways. A child needs to see that wrinkles don't mean the end of wonder. A young man needs to hear a story that doesn't end in conquest, but in humility. A woman on the brink of burnout needs to sit beside someone who's learned that slowing down isn't failure, it's wisdom. And sometimes, someone just needs to be reminded, you're not behind, you're not broken, you're just early on the path. We, the old ones, don't need to speak loudly anymore, but we must speak truthfully. And the truth is, Life doesn't owe us anything, but it has given us everything, hasn't it? Even the hard parts. Maybe especially the hard parts. That morning when I said goodbye to my wife, the silence that followed was unbearable. I sat in her chair, holding her sweater, breathing in whatever trace of her perfume still lingered. I thought the grief might kill me too, but it didn't. Changed me. I stopped waiting for joy to knock. I began to make tea for one and smile anyway. I lit a candle at dinner just because. I spoke aloud in empty rooms. Not because I was losing my mind, but because I finally realized presence isn't about bodies. It's about love, and love has never obeyed the rules of time or death. I've lived through wars, recessions, heartbreaks, and false hope. But I've also watched a newborn's fist wrap around my pinky. I've watched birds return to the same nest on my porch for 5 years straight. I've heard the voice of someone forgiving me for something I couldn't even forgive myself for. What a life. Not perfect, not without regret, but whole. And that brings me to the final truth, though I won't name it that way. It's too sacred for labels. It's the understanding that longevity isn't really about how many years you add to your life. It's about how much life you allow into your remaining years. Some people spend a decade hiding behind fear, resentment, routine. Others, sometimes with only months left, begin to bloom. So if you're hearing my voice, reading my thoughts, sharing this quiet hour with me, ask yourself, have I made space for joy today? Have I told someone I love them, even if they didn't say it first? Have I looked at the sky long enough to remember I'm a part of something wider? Because when my time comes, and it will, just like yours, I don't want to be remembered for how strong I stayed or how long I held on. I want to be remembered for how gently I let go, for how many people I let in, for how often I turned off the TV, silenced the noise, and simply sat, breathing, noticing, thanking. Maybe that's how you really predict someone's life expectancy. Not by tests or scans or how fast they walk, but by how slowly they love. If you've been with me through this long, wandering story, thank you, truly. It's not always easy to sit with the voice of an old man, but if something in these words found its way to your heart, then perhaps, just perhaps, we were meant to meet here. And if you'd like to return someday, you know where to find me. This space doesn't go anywhere. It waits. Just like the old do, not with fear, but with patience. Because even in the winter of life, there's warmth left in the embers.